My head is banging, Lord, I'm hanging onto the ground. I took an aspirin, now my head is spinning around. I wonder why I'm always feeling so low and down. It's got to be that dope. She's 25, but looks more like she's 79, because thalidomide has given her a baby born blind. She's always laughing because she's loony-toony, out of her mind. It's got to be that dope. Uppers and downers, get up and then fall. Citrates and nitrates, beef and stilbestrol. If you abuse your body, your mind will fall. It's got to be that dope. Woman on the corner just a stabbing her man. The man says, hold it, mama, cool it, girl, damn. All she wants is him to love her, but he don't understand. It's got to be that dope. Uppers and downers, get up and then fall. Citrates and nitrates, beef and stilbestrol. If you abuse your body, your mind will fall. It's got to be that dope. Chemical conglomerates have grown out of size like carboxymethylcellulose and sulfur oxides. When the answer is a cancer, why are we so surprised? It's got to be that dope. I shot an arrow into the air, fell to earth, I know not where. And thanks to this joint, I don't even care. It's got to be that dope. That Dope is a poem written by local poet Ersky Freeman. He wrote it about 30 years ago. Dope was a problem then. Dope continues to be a problem. And dope was a problem for the first woman I'd like to introduce you to, whom you probably already have heard of. Her name is Dorothy Dandridge. And it's sad that Dorothy Dandridge had a problem with illegal substances, because it seemed like she had everything that anybody could want. She was beautiful, she was talented, she was famous, she had everything, but at the same time she had nothing. She titled her autobiography with those very words, everything and nothing. She was born in 1923, and she was the child of a woman named Ruby Dandridge, who was also an actress. And Ruby Dandridge wanted to be in show business, and so she organized a performing group with Vivian Dandridge, Dorothy's sister, and another little girl, and it was called the Wonder Children, and they did the Chitlin circuit, touring clubs and venues throughout the South, performing, singing, and dancing. So Dorothy came by her talent almost by birth, because she started off working in show business at a very young age. However, when she was born, her parents separated shortly after her birth. And one of the things she said about her life was, my story is the tale of the man who was never there. As an adult, she married in 1942 to one of the members of the Nicholas brothers. Harold Nicholas was a member of that dancing duo you might have seen, phenomenal dancers. As a husband, maybe not quite so phenomenal, but they had a strained relationship and ended up divorcing, but not before she had a baby. They had a daughter named Harolyn, named after Harold, and that caused a lot of tension in their relationship because the baby was born brain damaged and had a lot of special needs. And at that time in particular, it was a source of stigma and shame for the family that their child was handicapped. But that didn't stop her from having her career. She continued to progress in her career, and she's noted as being the first Black woman to receive a nomination for Best Actress. That was in 1959 for the movie Porgy and Bess. She might have been better known for another movie, though, that was actually her big break in 1954. The movie director Otto Preminger saw her in some of the other movies and cabaret shows she had done, and thought she was good, beautiful, talented, of course, but maybe a little too sophisticated to play the lead role in the Black adaptation of the opera Carmen, originally by Bizet. And she was convinced that she could play the role, and she showed up to the audition dressed in a very earthy kind of manner to correspond with the role of Carmen Jones, who was a very sensual, down-to-earth kind of woman. And you know, as we know, she got the role. Her co-stars were Harry Belafonte, Pearl Bailey, and Diane Carroll. She also had an affair with Otto Preminger, so they continued to date for a while. She had wanted to play the role, a featured role in the movie The King and I, but he told her, oh no, you don't need a little bit part. There was a role that later went to Rita Moreno that was well received and well reviewed, and she later felt that she shouldn't have taken the advice of Otto Preminger about turning down this small role, but a featured role, and that ended up getting a lot of attention. She, eventually that affair ended, and she started dating and eventually married a man who was a nightclub owner named Jack Dennison. But it turned out that Jack Dennison was in great debt and ended up using all of her money. In fact, in her autobiography, she mentioned she went from having an Academy Award nomination to having $2.14 in her bank account. Yeah. So once again, she got divorced. At one point, she decided to write her autobiography. As I mentioned, it was called Everything and Nothing. And I'd like to read to you some of her comments about that because, again, that was another disappointment in many respects, although getting a book deal is a big deal. She said, "One Sunday late in 1964, as I prepared to do this book and held the contract in my hands, I telephoned some friends to break the news. Much to my astonishment, they said, 'What, an autobiography? Who are you to do an autobiography? If you tell your story, you'll set Negro womanhood back 100 years. You make a damned poor image of a Negro woman. You will do us no good. Nothing in your career has any meaning for the group.' As I listened, I wanted to die. To hear my friends tell me that they viewed me and my career as meaningless trash. I can't even recall all of the invective I listened to. The receiver stayed in my numbed hands as I got one view of who I was from people I had known for over 20 years. It was about all that I needed to finish off any interest in living. There was only one decision I could make. I must either kill myself if I was that unworthy, or die of attrition then and there, or simply will myself to death, which I felt like doing, or tell my story. Let outsiders decide whether my life, my work, my motherhood, my quest for security, my friendships were so reprehensible, so poor a human story." And so she did tell her story, and that's why I'm here today, to tell stories of women that you may or may not know some of the backstory on, or at least to introduce you to some of what they've done. I think everybody's story has value. Regrettably for Dorothy Dandridge, her story ended in tragedy because in 1965 she was found dead of an overdose. Some said it was suicide, some said it was accidental. We'll never know. Now, I mentioned that with Dorothy Dandridge, one of the things she wanted to do was get better roles than some of the ones she was offered. One role she wanted to play was that of Cleopatra. Oh, let me show you her picture. I got caught up and forgot to. Yeah, there's Dorothy Dandridge again. One of the roles she wanted to play was the big budget movie made in the early 60s, Cleopatra. She wanted to play the title role. That role went to Elizabeth Taylor, also a very talented and beautiful actress. Although I think it's a little bit ironic that Cleopatra, an Egyptian queen, Egypt is in Africa, that maybe Dorothy Dandridge had a claim to that role as a woman who was of African descent, perhaps more than Elizabeth Taylor, who did a good job herself. So what I'd like to do is introduce you to an actual African queen. Her name is Queen Hatshepsut. She reigned from 1478 BC to 1457 BC. She's believed to be the first woman anywhere on the planet to ever be a head of state. So how did this happen? Well, as was the case in Egypt at that time, and still in a lot of cultures today, the way you become king is your daddy has to be the king. And when he dies, then if you're the oldest boy in the family, then you ascend to the throne. Well, in Hatshepsut's case, she wasn't the oldest boy in the family, but she was the oldest girl. And her brother, a half-brother actually, was a little bit too young. His name was Thutmose II. Her father was Thutmose I. And so when her father passed, it was decided that she would rule co-regently with her younger brother. And she did that for a while. She enjoyed doing that. I guess she enjoyed it so much that she decided she wanted to be the pharaoh all by herself. So she managed to move her brother out of line for the throne, and she started telling people to sort of bolster her claim was not just that she was the daughter of the previous pharaoh, but that she was the daughter of God. God had ordained this, that God had spoken to her mother and to her while she was still in her mother's womb, that she was the descendant from Amun-Ra, and he had declared and decreed that she should be ruler. Some people probably still thought, I'm not sure if you're the rightful owner of the throne. And so she took it a step further, and she said, I'm not just a woman, I'm a man. And she had all of her official portraits changed to make her look more masculine. At that time, pharaohs typically wore long beards. I don't think I have her in her beard in that picture, but she had some of her statues and official portraits made to have her reflect men's clothing and a beard. And she changed her name, just in the way a woman whose name is Josephine, if she wanted to have a more masculine name, she would change it to what? Or a woman named Martina, yeah, there she goes with her beard, would change her name to what? Martin. Okay, so Hatshepsut was her original name, and then she changed it to Hatshepsut, the masculine form. When she wasn't defending her place as pharaoh, she was a successful ruler. She led 4 military campaigns that were successful, although the bulk of her time in office was a peaceful reign. She had a lot of art and architecture commissioned in Egypt, including 2 obelisks. An obelisk is a very tall, thin, narrow building that comes to a point at its apex. We have an example of an Egyptian obelisk here in Washington, D.C. Does anybody? Exactly. The Washington Monument is an Egyptian obelisk. Hers, however, were shorter. They weren't as tall as the Washington Monument. And one was covered in gold and the other was covered in silver. So they made an impressive sight when the sun hit them from a distance. So the next time you see the Washington Monument, don't just think of our first leader, George Washington, but also think of the first woman ever on earth to be a ruler, Queen Hatshepsut. I'm going a little too fast here. Okay, this is an artist's rendition of the Queen of Sheba. You might know of the Queen of Sheba from her mention in the Book of Kings in the Old Testament. The Queen of Sheba, or Makeda, ruled in what we would now consider Ethiopia or Yemen. And that was a cultural powerhouse, much the way the United States is a major player in today's world. Ethiopia and Egypt were sort of the major players back in antiquity. And she had heard that King Solomon in Israel was one of the wisest men ever. And so she was curious to go meet this man. And Israel was a small country, nowhere near the influence that Ethiopia would have commanded. So she made a trip and had a very large caravan. Just the gold alone that she carried to present as a gift to King Solomon would be, in today's terms, about $3 million worth of gold. She had caravans of camels and other animals bringing jewels and fine cloths. She was transported on a palanquin, which is like a canopy bed, but without the mattress, but a mat, and portable so that they could carry her through the desert to meet King Solomon. She had a lot of riddles that she posed to King Solomon to test his knowledge and how smart he was. But he proved to be exceedingly smart, because as you might also know that King Solomon, in addition to being a learned, smart man, he also loved women. He had 700 wives and concubines, and when he saw Queen Makeda, he was impressed with her too, and he made a play for her. And she was like, oh no, you're not going to send me home in disgrace. I'm a virgin and a ruler, that can't happen. And so Solomon said to her, well, if I were to give you something you needed, then you would be obligated to give me something I needed, right? And to her, that was almost like a ridiculous question. That would be like me saying to Donald Trump, you haven't been in D.C. that long, and if you ever come up short with money, I got you. I'll let you hold $20. Yeah, exactly. You'd laugh. He'd laugh. Why would a billionaire come to someone like me for $20? So Queen Makeda agreed. Sure, yeah. If you ever need anything, If I ever need anything from you, I just gave you $3 million worth of gold. Yeah, right, sure. Back in those days, state visits typically lasted a long time. She was there about 6 months. And on the last night of her visit, he threw a big banquet for her. And he decided that the menu that evening would be very rich, highly seasoned, very salty food. And he decided that he would remove all the containers of water except for one that he would place by his bedside. Yeah, we see the setup. So she enjoyed the very spicy meal, and she sent her servant to go get her some water. And the servant found that the only container of water in the whole compound was by King Solomon's bed. And so that's where he went to go get this water. And King Solomon said, "Oh no, have her come and ask me for it." So she came and asked him for the water, and he gave it to her. 9 months later, 9 months later, she had a child, a son whom she named Menelik. He was called Ibn al-Hakim, which means son of the wise man. And it is said that the contemporary ruler of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, is a descendant from that union of Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. So Solomon was not only wise, but quite clever. Okay. I'd like to share another poem. This is a poem, again, by another local writer named Laini Mataka. And I think it sort of embodies some of the gutsiness that Hatshepsut must have had and some of the street smarts that Queen Makeda probably wishes she had had. Laini Mataka's poem is called "Just How Traditional Do We Supposed to Be?" Sometimes relating to some brothers is like dealing with Neanderthals. A club on the head, the drag of your ass, and true love abounds. The only time they want you to be a woman is in bed. Otherwise, be obedient, be humble, be quiet, be stupid, disappear, but don't take away the goodies. That you could even entertain a thought and attract a sperm at the same time is inconceivable. Everybody knows that menstruation must destroy brain cells over a long period of time. Be a woman who earns her own money. Be a woman who's aware of her own sexuality. Be a woman who can hold her own in most conversations, and you will be a woman alone. What we, black he and she, have been to one another is the history of the love story of the world's evolution. He who controlled the purse strings did not control everything. A sense of balance was our gift from the gods, and we gave it up at the evil insistence of some people who just happened to be passing through Africa. And now you want to tell me, and ignore even the most blatant of facts, that here and now you still want to talk about a woman's place. After one of the Kandaki queens personally challenged Alexander the Great, after Nzinga used all aspects of her female self to fight and keep the Portuguese out of Angola, after Sister Ya encouraged the sisters to kick tail and take their Ghanaianness back, after Harriet tricked death out of several hundred slaves whom she personally freed in spite of her sleeping fits. After my grandmother worked 12 and 13 hours daily in other people's kitchens and singly raised the last of 6 children and then me, you want to tell me about a woman's place? After I've been taking care of myself for the last 12 years, being totally and completely on my own. Honey, the next time you ask me about a woman's place, you better be asking me a question. Every inch of space I occupy is a woman's place. Everywhere I dare to stride is a woman's place. Everywhere I lay my head, everywhere I spread my dreads is a woman's place. Anywhere I shake my butt, anywhere I leave a thought, anywhere I leave a drop of blood, anywhere I conceive or delete is a woman's place. Anywhere I leave a footprint, a fingerprint, or a scent is a woman's place, and I'm talking history here. Except for where phalluses bloom, Show me a place that ain't a woman's place, and I'll show you where you've lost your mind. Yeah, Laini Mataka, just how traditional do I supposed to be? So let's talk about somebody a little bit more contemporary. I was saying if Donald Trump needed $20, I could come up with $20 for him. But could you come up, say, with $150,000 to give away? Well, the next woman I want to talk about did just that. Back in 1998, 96, Bill Pace was working at the University of Southern Mississippi, and he was in charge of donor gifts, soliciting funds for the university. He opens an envelope, and in there is a check for $150,000, which was not that unusual because a lot of alumni and prominent people support higher education. But this was in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and he knew who all the big players were and who the wealthy families were, and this particular check was signed Osceola McCarty. Who is Osceola McCarty? Osceola McCarty was a washerwoman. Now, when I say washerwoman, I don't mean she owned a string of laundromats. She was a washerwoman who did it the old-fashioned way. She had big black cauldrons that she set to boil and would wash the clothes in those cauldrons, hang them up on a clothesline. She charged $10 a load for the wash for a family of 4 for a week's worth of clothing. That was up from when she started washing clothes, when she charged 50 cents a load. She was born in 1908, right outside of Hattiesburg, and now lived in Hattiesburg, right outside the campus of the University of Southern Mississippi. And the reason she donated that money was because she had always wanted to have an education and never had the opportunity. She dropped out of school in the 6th grade. Her aunt had gotten sick. Her aunt didn't have a husband or any children, so she dropped out to help take care of her aunt. By the time her aunt recuperated, her classmates had moved on, and she felt ashamed about having to go back to school and be so far behind everyone else, so she never went back. And that's when she started working. And she found that she loved washing clothes. She enjoyed the work. She did it and got a lot of satisfaction from doing it. But in addition to being a hard worker, Osceola McCarty was also a frugal woman. She believed in saving her money. She didn't have a credit card, she didn't have cable, she didn't have a car. She walked everywhere she went. She didn't have air conditioning. Mississippi in the summertime, I would imagine it gets kind of hot, but she didn't feel like she needed it. If she wanted something, she saved her money until she could buy it. Like I said, she didn't believe in purchasing things on credit. And then when arthritis forced her to finally quit working, she had amassed quite a bit of money. She went to the bank, Trustmark Bank, and because she was illiterate and she wanted to arrange her affairs, what the bank official had to do was he set out 10 dimes, and after they had accounted for the money she would probably need to live on for the remainder of her life, he said, "How would you like to apportion up your money?" So she separated 1 dime and said that would go to Friendship Baptist Church, where she was a member. 3 dimes she wanted to go to extended family members. She never married or had children herself either. And then the remaining 6 dimes was the money she wanted to send to the University of Southern Mississippi, preferably as a scholarship for other African American children. Originally, the scholarship was planned to go into effect after her death, but when they saw that this washerwoman, this poor woman, had become this wonderful philanthropist, they decided they wanted her to see the first beneficiary of her largesse. The first recipient was a girl named Stephanie Bullock, whose brother was also going to college, and the family didn't have quite enough to send both kids to go to school at the same time, so she was exceedingly glad that Ms. McCarty had made this possible. She got a scholarship of $1,000. At that time, it was $2,400 a year to go to the University of Southern Mississippi. I need to find out how much the tuition is now. I would gather that here at the University of Maryland, it costs a little bit more than $2,400 a year to go to school. When word of what she had done started to be spread, many other people donated money to increase the trust that she had set up. And in fact, she won the Presidential Medal of Honor and was brought here to Washington, D.C. during the Clinton White House to meet the President and First Lady. And she got a number of other awards both here in the United States and from people around the world who honored her for her donation. I was especially struck by one interview I read where the reporter said to her, "Why didn't you spend the money on yourself?" And her response is, "I am spending it on myself." Another poem, if I may, about money by a man named D.H. Lee, and he calls himself Seeker of Truth. Money makes the world go round, not truth or love or being sound, not positivity or the negative. With money, you can start to live. It'll take you near or far away, whatever the cost, I know I can pay. But the love of money is the root of all evil? You can't tell that to colored people. How can it be bad what we never had? I know without it I'm doing bad. Just give me a little bit, a small sum, and I'll wait patiently until it comes. With money, you can feed some people. Don't tell me that money is evil. Okay, that's a picture of Osceola McCarty with her wash. And she also wrote a book called Rich Wisdom for Simple Living. So here she is at a book signing. The last people I'd like to talk to you about is a woman and her husband. The woman's name is Ellen Craft. Her husband's name was William Craft. And they lived in Milledgeville, Georgia, out of Macon. Ellen was a slave on the plantation of Major James Smith. And she was the daughter of Smith and an African woman. And as things turned out, Ellen didn't look much like her mother, but she was the spitting image of her daddy. And this caused her some problems because Mr. Smith was married, and his wife wasn't all that happy about the fact that he had cheated on her. And she couldn't really fight her husband about it, so she took out her anger on Ellen. And then when Ellen was around 13 years old, the wife decided, oh, I have a solution to my problem, having to look at this product of my husband's infidelity every day. She had a cousin on a nearby plantation who was getting married. So she presented Ellen as a gift, a wedding gift to this family member. So Ellen had to leave familiar surroundings and go live on this other location. So Ellen decided at an early age that she would never want slavery to be inflicted on anybody she had anything to do with. And so she decided that she would never get married and never have any children. So she makes her life on this new plantation. Over time, she meets William. William is a carpenter and a cabinet maker. And William falls in love with Ellen. He wants to get married, but Ellen's like, no, I'm not interested in getting married. But William was evidently persistent because they did get married. They got married, but there was a condition for her marriage. Ellen told William, I'll marry you, but you have to come up with some idea or some plan for us to escape slavery. So, as it turned out, William was a very religious man, and he prayed about the situation, and he felt like God gave him an idea. And after 4 days of planning and 4 days of execution, they were free. This was William's plan. As I mentioned, Ellen looked like her father, so she was very fair-skinned. So William said, why don't you pretend to be a white man traveling up north with your servant? So Ellen's job was a seamstress, by the way, and like I said, William was a carpenter. And he was such a good carpenter that he was hired out into the city of Macon to work for other people in the city as a cabinet maker. And his owner allowed him to keep a little bit of his earnings for himself. So William had been saving his money and used that money to buy some of the fabric that Ellen used to make some clothing. He also used some of the money to buy a train ticket. Now, we often talk about the Underground Railroad, and it wasn't really an actual train that was sort of the code word. But in this particular case, they actually did buy train tickets. William used his money to buy some train tickets. They lived in Georgia, and the nearest free state is Pennsylvania. And so unlike Harriet Tubman, who lived in Maryland, and Maryland shares a border with Pennsylvania, so if you're on foot or have to steal a horse or a wagon, you can make it. But going from Georgia all the way up north, and particularly with people, looking for you, that wasn't so feasible. So they bought 2 train tickets. Ellen came up with this part of the idea. It was illegal for slaves to know how to read and write, and she knew that they were going to have to transfer trains. They weren't going to have a nonstop trip from Georgia up north. And just then as now, when you go to a hotel, now we would probably sign a credit card bill. Then you would have to sign the hotel register. And she didn't know how to read or write. And so she needed a way to disguise the fact that she didn't know how to read or write. Moreover, even here in Washington, D.C., if you see somebody on the subway train or the bus, to pass the time, they might have a newspaper or a book or an e-reader to entertain themselves while they're while they're traveling. And Ellen didn't even want to perpetrate like she knew how to read or write because she was afraid she might hold the newspaper upside down trying to pretend, and then people will know something is wrong. And if you're a white man wealthy enough to have your own slave traveling up north and you can't even read and write, that would look suspicious. So her idea was that she would say that her arm was broken. And so she would bind her right arm in a sling, and then it would be obvious why she didn't have a book or why she couldn't sign the hotel register. Moreover, she decided that the cover story was that she was sick and she was going up north to see a specialist, a doctor who could treat her condition. And she made a poultice, a cream that made it look like she had a rash, so people wouldn't want to come too close to her to talk to her. And since she was a woman and smaller than the average man, that lent more credence to the idea that she was sickly. So that was their plan. It took 4 days for them to put these things together. Now, it turned out that probably God did give William this idea because it was providential that it was in December that they decided to make their escape. Just like then as now, Christmas time is in December, things are a little bit more relaxed. People are partying. People are visiting folks in other locations. And the same thing would happen with the slaves. They would be given passes to go to another plantation to visit their family members who were somewhere else. There was a period of time when you didn't have to do as much work because it was holiday time. And so if someone wasn't at the place where you normally would expect them to be, it wouldn't raise alarm, at least not initially. So if we said, where's Natasha Rodriguez? She's supposed to be at work. Here it is, 1 o'clock and she's not around. Where do you think she is? And they say, oh, she probably went to Dr. Hayes' plantation and she's probably got a hangover and still sleeping it off, so no big deal. So they decided to leave, and when they got to the train station, they couldn't sit together. They couldn't sit together because of segregation. There was a colored car and then there was a white car. So they had to part one another. Ellen was in the white car, seated by the window, empty seat beside her. And even before the train is out of the station, she's thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get caught. The man who took the seat beside her was a man named Mr. Craig. He was a friend of the family who owned her and had known her since she was a toddler. And so he sits down, and Southerners are very friendly people. He says, good afternoon, how you doing? She doesn't speak. She's afraid her voice will betray her. And you know what happens if you don't speak to somebody. They say it more louder and get in your face. Good afternoon. And so she mumbled something to him and pretended like she was deaf so he wouldn't want to have a conversation. Meanwhile, in the colored car, William was having his own issues. He was sitting by the window also. He didn't have a problem with anybody seated next to him, but as he looked out the window, he saw a man striding down the platform who caught his eye through the glass. This guy was his boss, not his plantation owner, but the man he worked for in the city. And he was afraid that the man was going to get on the train and pull him off, but fortunately the train pulled out of the station before the man could do that. Later, when it was realized what had happened, that man said he had had a funny feeling about William all that week. Something was different, and so he found out what it was, but too late. Good for William. So they continue traveling, and there's one place where they get off the train and they have to transfer to another train. And so Ellen is standing on the platform just chit-chatting with another white man. And she notices her luggage being offloaded from the train. So she turns to William, she says, would you go get my suitcases, please? And then she turns back and has a conversation with the man. And then William brings the suitcases and sits them down in front of her. And she says, "Thank you very much," and goes back to talking. And the man turns to her and says, "Are you crazy?" And Ellen's like, "What? Do you know what you just did?" Ellen is clueless. He says, "You don't say please and thank you to slaves? You'll ruin him talking to him like that." So she had to make a point to be very rude and nasty to her husband for the remainder of the trip so she wouldn't arouse suspicion again. When they got to Baltimore, they had another interesting challenge. Again, they had to change trains, and Ellen wasn't sure that William had made it onto the same train with her. As I mentioned, they couldn't sit together. And she was really nervous and upset, so she asked the conductor to go to the color car to see if her boy had made it onto the train. Unbeknownst to Ellen, this conductor was actually a member of the resistance. He was a member of the Underground Railroad, and he did help slaves escape. As I mentioned, Harriet Tubman lived in Dorchester County, Maryland, and Baltimore was a city of some size, just like it is now. And so you had a lot of abolitionists working in Baltimore, as well as a lot of bounty hunters working in Baltimore. So a lot was going on here. So the conductor makes his way back to the color car, and he says, "Look, your master doesn't know where you are. She thinks you didn't make the train. You have a golden opportunity." I can arrange your freedom. What do you say? William said, "Nah, I ain't never leaving my master." The man said, "Wait a minute, I don't think you understand what's happening here. You have the opportunity to be free. All you have to do is, follow me." "Nah, sir, I ain't never leaving my master." So the man, threw up his hands. He said, "But if you ever change your mind, let me give you the name and address of a Quaker family who will help you in Pennsylvania if you decide to avail yourself of this opportunity." It was on December 25th, 1848, that William and Ellen Craft made their way into Pennsylvania, set foot on free soil. What a wonderful Christmas gift. They did take advantage of the information that train conductor had given William and stayed for a while in the home of those Quakers. They eventually made their home in Boston, where William took up his trade as a carpenter and cabinet maker again, and Ellen worked as a seamstress. They continued living there, not just working, however, but they also became abolitionists and did the lecture circuit in New England talking about the evils of slavery. They did such a good job that word of what they were doing filtered all the way back to Georgia, and their owner sent a bounty hunter to capture them. So on short notice, they had to leave Boston, and they made their home in London, where they lived until after the Civil War, and then they came back to the United States and even back to Georgia. An account of their story was written called "Running 1,000 Miles to Freedom, The Escape of William and Ellen Craft" by William Craft. And Ellen, who said she would never get married and never have any children, had 5 babies. Thank you so much for your attention. Let me show you a picture. That's the cover of their book, and that's Ellen in her older years, Ellen and William. And here's an artist's rendition of her in her disguise.
So then William learned to write? He wrote it? William?
I guess he did, because the book is by William Craft. It might have been dictated. It might have been I think they did become literate, because I believe they eventually started a school, and through an ironic twist, he had some transactions with somebody where he was trying to make some purchases, and he ended up, the person he was doing the transaction with was in another country and owned slaves and wanted to pay William in slaves. For a short while, he was the owner of slaves because this person couldn't pay him in cash, but eventually they got that settled. So yeah, I think they did become literate, because I think they started a school for black children when they came back to Georgia. So, any other questions or comments? I also read somewhere along the line that one of the descendants from William and Ellen Craft lived in Silver Spring. So I don't know how true that is, but maybe one day he or she will reveal themselves and I can add this part of the story.
Does anybody ever know if the train conductor found out?
His name wasn't given in the book, so I don't know if he ever found out. But maybe so, because like I said,
Big smile, bring it up.
because they were lecturers and appeared, if their owner found out, then it's quite possible that the man in Baltimore found out.
How did they take the name Kraft?
My guess is that it refers to the fact that he was a craftsman, probably being a carpenter and a cabinet maker. And maybe one of his owners along the name was named Kraft. Sometimes slaves just took the names of the people who they worked for. But that, my guess is because he was a craftsman, that's how he got the name Kraft. Wonderful, we can go back to eating.